Hi, and welcome to Really Understanding Incoterms 2020, a series of comprehensive masterclasses. I'm Bob Ronai, and this is lesson number 10, the third part of DAP and DDP. But first, of course, the disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. The contents of this course are not legal advice. I was a member of the International Chamber of Commerce's Incoterms 2020 drafting group, which created these rules. Some of the contents are direct quotes from the Incoterms 2020 publication, number 723E of the International Chamber of Commerce. My explanations, my comments, and my opinions are based on my knowledge and my experience of over 5 decades. My intent in creating this comprehensive course on Incoterms 2020 is to ensure that my knowledge and my experience is passed on to you for a better future for you in trade. In this lesson, we'll continue to look at the almost identical DAP and DDP, continuing with A10 and B10 notices, A5 and B5 insurance, then what differentiates DDP from DAP, that's A7 and B7 export and import clearance, and A9, B9 allocation of costs again, and letter of credit issues. I'll explain, as always, what the book says first, but then I'll examine the many issues arising from these articles as we go along. A10 and B10 notices. The seller must give the buyer any notice required to enable the buyer to receive the goods. The buyer must, whenever it is agreed that the buyer is entitled to determine the time within an agreed period and or the point of taking delivery within the named place of destination, give the seller sufficient notice. The seller simply must give the buyer notice that they have delivered or will deliver the goods into the destination terminal, or that they would like to deliver to the buyer's premises. It's a bit of, when can I deliver them, please? The buyer, of course, must inform the seller when they want delivery and to where they want delivery, especially if it's not to a terminal. In fact, when we say the buyer's premises, it could well be a facility that they are constructing for delivery of machinery. A5 and B5. The seller has no obligation to the buyer to make a contract of insurance. Equally, the buyer has no obligation to the seller to make a contract of insurance. However, the buyer must provide the seller, at the seller's request, risk and cost, with information that the seller needs for obtaining insurance. Now, the seller would be very wise to arrange its own insurance if it does not already have an annual or open policy, because the seller has the risk if the goods are damaged or lost in transit. Now, the seller should also be aware that it has the contractual risk if the goods are damaged or lost, that it may well not be able to deliver the contract goods within the agreed date or period, making it in breach of contract. A7 export and import clearance for DAP. A. Export and transit clearance. Where applicable, the seller must carry out and pay for all export and transit clearance formalities required by the country of export and any country of transit other than the country of import, such as export and transit licence, security clearance for export transit, pre-shipment inspection, and any other official authorisation. Assistance with import clearance. The seller, where applicable, the seller must assist the buyer at the buyer's request, risk and cost in obtaining any documents and or information related to all import clearance formalities, including security requirements and pre-shipment inspection needed by the country of import. B7, A, assistance with export and transit clearance. Where applicable, the buyer must assist the seller at the seller's request, risk and cost in obtaining any documents and or information related to all export and transit clearance formalities, including security requirements and pre-shipment inspection needed by the country of export and any country of transit other than the country of import. Import clearance, where applicable, the buyer must carry out and pay for all formalities required by the country of import, such as import licence, security clearance for import, pre-shipment inspection, and any other official authorisation. Now we'll look at DDP as opposed to DAP. And again, A7, export and import clearance. And this is the main article that differentiates between DAP and DDP. Where applicable, the seller must carry out and pay for all export, transit, import clearance formalities required by the countries of export, transit and import, such as export, transit, import licence, security clearance for export, transit, import, pre-shipment inspection and any other official authorisation. This rule in practice is impossible to use in most destination countries. Most, but not all, countries require the named importer to be an entity registered in that country. Some countries have import licences which may only be given to entities registered in that country. Most VAT and GST systems will only allow offsets or refunds to entities registered for taxation purposes within that country. So the VAT or GST is built into the seller's DDP selling price and unrecoverable by the buyer. In some countries, the customs law allows the authorities to recover any shortfall in import duties, for whatever reason, such as under-invoicing, from the party buying the goods from the DDP seller, as well as anyone involved in the transaction, such as forwarders, customs brokers and banks, even though those parties are not at all named or involved in the import process. Penalties can also be imposed on those parties. Customs brokers sometimes clear the goods in the buyer's name without their knowledge or approval, even though they bill all the costs back to the seller. Legal issues could arise from that incorrect treatment. B7, where applicable, the buyer must assist the seller at the seller's request, risk and cost in obtaining any documents and or information related to all export, transit, import clearance formalities required by the countries of export, transit, import, such as export, transit, import licence, security clearance for export, transit and import, pre-shipment inspection and any other official authorisation. DAP and DDP and letters of credit. These rules are completely incompatible with the usual LC operation. LCs almost invariably specify a port of loading, a port of discharge, latest date of shipment, and require presentation of an on-board transport document, etc. But these are all before delivery at the destination place. An LC to pay for goods already delivered just does not make any sense at all. It certainly would be no protection whatsoever for the seller. DAP, in summary, it is a potentially dangerous rule to use, and in my opinion it should be avoided for FCLs, LCLs or air freight. It does not work with the usual format of LCs. DDP, in summary, also it is a very dangerous rule to use, and in my opinion it should be avoided. VAT and GST can be problematic. It does not work with the usual format of LCs. In the next lesson, we'll start to look at the DPU rule. The more complex and confusing articles A2 and B2, yet again, delivery and taking delivery. Then in the following lesson, we'll look at A6 and B6, delivery and transport document A9 and B9, allocation of costs, and A10, B10 notices. As always, I'll explain what the book says first, which is where the others usually stop, but then I will examine the issues arising for these articles as we go along. If you like this lesson, please click on the thumbs up button below. If you'd like to be alerted to each new lesson, please hit the subscribe button and the bell. And please feel free to leave any comments and questions relevant to this lesson below. Till next lesson.